I'm Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up in the next hour, Chamath Palihapitiya of Social Capital joins us for an extended conversation on the biggest issues facing tech and venture capitalists right now. Plus, Uber predicts customers will hail flying taxis sooner than you think. We're going to hear from Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi ahead. And more questions swirling around Tesla. After a bizarre earnings call, CEO Elon Musk is now reportedly putting contractors on notice and sparring with Warren Buffett. This week, officials from top tech companies including Google, Amazon, and Facebook attended a meeting at the White House on artificial intelligence. This AI summit was held amid rising concerns about jobs and the influence of China. And it wasn't just tech. Officials from Goldman Sachs, Boeing, and CVS also got an invitation. We covered the details Thursday ahead of the meeting, and Bloomberg News' Ben Brody and Spencer Soper joined us.
There are some signs of those tensions easing. In addition to this invitation, there was even the First Lady, Melania Trump, unveiled her initiative, Be Best, this kind of anti-cyberbullying, anti-opioid campaign, and Amazon even got a shout-out during that unveiling. So the Trump tweets at Amazon have settled for now, and along with that little gesture with the First Lady's initiative, seems like there could be a cooling of the tension.
And is there any signal from anyone other than the president himself, from within the administration, that Amazon in particular has something to worry about?
I mean, there's always regulatory concerns about big tech, and so Amazon always gets lumped in with that. But and then on the Postal Service thing, it just seems to have settled. But who knows? It can be so erratic, and it seems like we're always just one Washington Post headline away from another Trump tweet.
So, Ben, on that note, what do we know about this meeting?
We got about 40 companies from all kinds of sectors, some of those high-tech sectors, of course, but lots of industry that is going to be kind of implementing this AI. And the message that they're hearing just right about now from the White House is, look, we are not rushing in to regulate what you guys are doing. Go out there, develop. I think the quote was, we didn't cut the first phone lines before Alexander Graham Bell made the first phone call. Now we're a little bit past that, but that is the message that they're hearing.
So what are we expecting them to talk about, especially with regards to U.S. competitiveness when it comes to other countries like China?
Well, I think, China is in a lot of ways sort of the thing animating this whole conference. It's a little unclear to me how much that's going to be the focus of these individual breakout sessions. The agenda focuses more on applications in particular sectors like energy or logistics. But I think there's no question that the White House is really feeling pressure here to make sure that America stays competitive. We feel that we're first, but I think the pressure that you and I hear a lot from industry is we're worried that we're going to lose our advantage in just the coming years.
Spencer, when it comes to AI in particular, talk about what Amazon might be pushing for here, with respect to other tech companies like Google and Facebook and Apple.
Well, I think Amazon in particular, they really want to steer the conversation toward how AI is beneficial and get it away from this notion of, job-killing robots and that sort of thing. And in particular, I think what they're going to want to do is try to impress upon the government of the need for AI in healthcare and healthcare innovation. So they have a lot of cloud solutions that are being embraced by healthcare startups and healthcare technology companies. And I think they're really going to try to, and that's an area that will be subject to heavy government scrutiny and regulation. So I think in that part, they're going to really try to make a message of how AI can be used to save lives, prolong lives, reduce healthcare costs, so those sorts of things.
Ben, talk to us about the state of AI regulation or lack thereof, because part of the problem is that real regulation could be years away if it happens, right?
I think that's exactly right. I think almost everybody I've talked to, Democrats, Republicans, people in industry, people in academia, they say this is years away. What I think a lot of these companies are looking for is two things. The first thing is standards. How good does the AI need to be? What does it need to do? And the other thing they're looking for is to understand how the current regulatory environment. Now, Spencer mentioned the regulations in healthcare, things like HIPAA, that's the healthcare privacy law. How is that going to apply if AI is making decisions about your health or aiding in a diagnostic? I think what the industry really wants to know right now is how exactly to think about those issues before they look at any kind of new broad-based AI regulation act.
So, you know so much about how much these companies are lobbying Congress, what they are asking for, what kind of money they are spending. Talk to us about how lobbying efforts have changed or evolved over the last year under the Trump administration.
Well, I think you see this really interesting aspect of lobbying the Trump administration. There are a lot of people who go straight to the White House in a way that they didn't, even under President Obama, who certainly had a lot of friends in the tech sector. But you see these companies increasingly going to the White House, increasingly going to the vice president's office. So I think that's a major issue. You, of course, are always seeing increasing spending in these things. But the other thing you're seeing is they're sort of going to the White House and they're looking at these core issues. AI, regulation, training is a huge place where I think the White House and technology really get together, even as you're seeing those things that Spencer was talking about, the Washington Post tweets and the concern that the tech and the White House are going head-to-head on issues like immigration or other social policies.
Well, two of the richest people in the world are showing no love to Bitcoin. Bill Gates told CNBC that he would short the cryptocurrency if there was an easy way to do it. He added that Bitcoin is, quote, an asset class. You're not producing anything. It's a reversal for Gates, who called Bitcoin exciting just 4 years ago. The other titan weighing in, none other than Warren Buffett, saying the largest cryptocurrency in the world is, quote, probably rat poison squared. Buffett is echoing the words of his business partner, Charles Munger, who in 2014 also compared Bitcoin to rat poison. Coming up, we head to the Uber Elevate Summit in Los Angeles and talk Uber's flying car ambitions with Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi. That is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Uber is getting an out-of-this-world boost to get cars off the ground and into the sky. The ride-hailing company announced a partnership with NASA to study urban manned aircraft. Uber will share its data with NASA in an effort to move the world closer to developing air traffic management systems for a world with flying cars. Uber isn't building these flying cars, but is working with manufacturers in conjunction with its ride-hailing network to possibly develop flying taxi-like vehicles. And meantime, Uber is hoping to get its self-driving project back on track soon. Testing was halted in March when one of its self-driving cars hit and killed a pedestrian near Phoenix. CEO Dara Khosrowshahi spoke with Bloomberg Tech's Brad Stone in an onstage interview at an Uber conference in Los Angeles.
I think for us, it really brought home this idea that safety has to come first. And as it relates to that tragedy, we have grounded our autonomous fleet, and that was a decision that we made.
Any sense for when you'll start driving again?
It'll be within the next few months. I don't know, and the time will be right when the time is right, because we are doing a top-to-bottom safety review, both internally and with independent folks coming in to take a look at our culture, our practices, et cetera, so that when we get back on the road, we all know as a team that we're getting back on the road in as safe a way as possible and responsible way as possible. And it just kind of, it's just one more way that it hits home how important safety is and how important it is for us to engage with our regulatory partners and the various aeronautics players, et cetera, who have played this game and have worked in a safe environment for a very, very long time and have established, a long track record of success here. We've got to learn here.
Can you tell us anything about the status of the NTSB investigation?
It's ongoing. We have been working hand in hand with them, and we've been giving them all the data that they need. We will not be tweeting ahead of their findings.
Yes. Yeah. Elon, take note.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. There have been media reports that that this was a group that was moving fast, in part to impress you, to meet some benchmarks and deadlines by the end of the year. What do you take away from that as you move forward in ATG, and also as you set these very ambitious goals that we've heard about here for Uber Elevate?
You can't sacrifice safety. Now, that's easy to say, right? There are trade-offs in life, and I do think that you have to beware of unintended consequences in everything that you do. And there's a balance, which is you want to push teams to be ambitious. You want to push them to innovate at the fringes. You want to get teams to be uncomfortable, but at the same time, you really have to check yourself and go back to first principles and ask yourself, are we doing the right thing? Are we pushing too hard, and is it coming at the cost of safety? And if it is, then you have to take a step back. One of the unique characteristics of Uber is that we are at our core technology company. That is our root. We will win because of the talent of the technical people that we have in our offices. But what makes us different as a technology company is that we don't just deal in bits and bytes. We're at this intersection of the digital and the physical world. And it's hard enough to create a delightful digital experience, push a button and something happens. But what's harder is when you push a button and a car shows up. And, traffic can get in the way. A driver may decide to do something else, or when you push a button and a burger shows up. To make that experience delightful, dependable, affordable is a very, very big challenge. And that's where kind of this idea of being a company that pushes forward, and a company that challenges the status quo, but then understands that we don't just live in the digital world, we also live in the physical world, and that comes with compromises, and that comes with responsibilities that we've got to be aware of.
Elon Musk reportedly locked out all contractors who couldn't find a current Tesla employee to vouch for the quality of their work. A recent email obtained by website Electric was sent out to Tesla employees warning that all outside workers worldwide would be denied access into Tesla factories. Part of the email read, quote, "By default, anyone who does not have a Tesla employee putting their reputation on the line for them will be denied access to our facilities and networks on Monday morning. This applies worldwide. Time to scrub off the barnacles." This comes just days after a bizarre earnings call when Musk cut off boring Wall Street analysts asking about cash-burning companies' finances. Bloomberg Businessweek's Max Chafkin brought us all the details on Monday.
They are scrambling to make these Model 3 sedans as quickly as they can, and it seems like perhaps the stress of the moment is beginning to show.
He's referred to workers as barnacles before, but isn't the goal to produce more cars, not less?
Well, there was a memo that leaked a couple of weeks ago where Elon Musk basically said that Tesla was spending too much money and that they needed to find ways to reduce costs, that there had been sort of I think he called it a Russian nesting doll, so another fun metaphor for this. But the idea being that Tesla was relying on these outside contractors, basically acting too much like a normal car company. So he in that memo said he was going to ask everyone to justify their use of contractors. Now we have this memo where he's basically saying you have to personally vouch for these people.
Is this because the contractors aren't living up or something? Is it because of the production problems?
Well, we don't really know. I mean, the fact is there have been production problems. Tesla has been spending a lot of money. So I guess you could read into that and say that's what's going on. On the other hand, it's sort of surprising if you're trying to make as many cars as possible that you'd want to cut staff at this moment. So it's kind of a head scratcher.
Now, investors are still talking about this bizarre earnings call. So to refresh our memory, let's take a listen to what his exchanges included with analysts.
We're going to go to YouTube. Sorry. these questions are so dry. They're killing me. I mean, we're talking about a 3 to 5% difference. Yeah. So, like, you know, and it's something that we'll solve like within a 3 to 6 months later. So, like, it's not like it's like some, you know, don't make a federal case out of it. Next, boring bonehead questions are not cool. Next, I think that if people are concerned about volatility, they should definitely not buy our stock. I am not here to convince you to buy our stock. Do not buy it if volatility is scary. There you go.
So I'm also wondering, are you guys going to let Porsche beat you to market with a 350 kilowatt-hour supercharger? Because I know you've mentioned, V3.
We'll keep going until the questions are not boring.
Now, when you heard Elon at the top of the call saying we're going to YouTube, he's talking about going to a 25-year-old host of a millennial-focused channel called Hyperchange Television, who ended up getting in 23 minutes of Q&A with Musk. Take a listen.
So I set up a campaign and I had about a couple hundred of my viewers email into Tesla's IR team representing over 20 million worth of shares to get a voice for retail investors on the conference call. And so I sort of crowdsourced a bunch of questions for my viewers and subscribers and then pitched it to Elon and Tesla, and they let me on the call. I'm wondering why you particularly wanted on the earnings call. I mean, if you're talking on behalf of shareholders, couldn't you have waited for a shareholder day or an annual meeting, which is where shareholders' voices are heard? The earnings call typically is for analysts. Yeah, I mean, I think of myself as sort of an analyst as well. And although shareholders do get a question to ask, or do get the chance to ask questions at the shareholder meeting, the quarterly conference calls are also for updates on the business in the sort of 12 to 18-month time frame, additionally going into the financials. I will say I could have dived more into the financials, specifically the trajectory of operating expenses, because I think that's really important about them going to profitability. But I do think there is a place for these more strategic questions on the conference call, and the analysts just weren't addressing them. Things like the feedback from the huge energy storage project in Australia, which Elon Musk then referenced. They're working on a gigawatt-hour scale project because of that success. Did you feel at all used by Elon Musk in the sense that he was able to give you 25 minutes, which then sort of took away some time that analysts could have been asking him questions with? No, I think it was a win-win. I think we really evolved the Tesla story, and I think there's been a ton of news that you're seeing coming out, about the Tesla network, about the Tesla Semi, about Tesla Energy, that is really evolving the long-term story out of those questions.
Galileo Russell there, the host of Hyperchange Television. And to be fair, Max, he did ask a lot of questions that many people would love to ask Elon about the technology and the future of Tesla that don't often get asked on these earnings calls. That said, this is a company that hasn't turned a profit in its 15-year history, so analysts are right to wonder if and when that might happen. Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the sort of concern when you saw the stock price fall in the wake of this call wasn't so much about having a YouTube personality, a sort of fanboyish analyst on the call. It was more about the reaction and the sort of seemingly erratic demeanor of Elon Musk. You have a company that is totally dependent on this one person, and that's why people are paying attention to his kind of eccentricities so closely.
A deal that will shake up the TV and broadband market in Europe. Vodafone is challenging Deutsche Telecom on its home turf. With its $22 billion deal for Liberty Media assets, we're going to hear from Deutsche Telekom CEO, hear what he has to say about the rivals tie-up. And later in the show, the CEO of one of the biggest startups in e-commerce is speaking out for employee benefits for all. We will hear from the CEO of Rent the Runway, Jennifer Hyman. This is Bloomberg. The battle for e-commerce supremacy has zeroed in on India. Walmart has agreed to pay $16 billion for a 77% stake in India's largest online retailer, Flipkart. It's Walmart's biggest deal ever as the retail giant looks to fend off Amazon in the world's second most populous nation. Morgan Stanley has estimated India's e-commerce market will grow to $200 billion in about a decade. Speaking of deals, Vodafone is shaking up Europe's fragmented media and telecom market with an 18 billion euro deal to buy almost a third of Liberty Global, taking cable assets in Germany, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Romania. It's part of a global push for scale as carriers face massive network investments and competition from digital players. The news caused waves throughout the industry, particularly in Germany, where Vodafone is reshaping spheres of influence that have already drawn sharp rebuke from its closest rival, Deutsche Telecom. We spoke exclusively with Deutsche Telekom CEO Tim Hodges about the tie-up. Take a listen.
I think this deal totally unacceptable because, there was a time where Deutsche Telekom was not allowed to sell their cable businesses in one piece. Would have created a much bigger price. It was sold in three pieces, and now all these three pieces are coming together in one under the roof of Vodafone. Second, we are building, let's say, the rural Germany with fiber infrastructure. Now, let's see where Vodafone is now going. Are they really willing to invest even into the rural areas? Have nothing seen in their business case today on this subject. The media industry, almost 60% of our TV market is monopolized by this cable operator in the future. Is this good for democracy? Is this good for the media companies in this society? So I question that. And there's a last thing. 25% of our households in Germany are housing associations, and there is no access for Deutsche Telekom. And my last point on the bitch is here. Look, we have a fully regulated Deutsche Telekom in the home market where we are building the infrastructure for 5.7 billion on an annual basis. Vodafone is investing less, is non-regulated, and is claiming that they are on eye level with us in the future on their fiber or on their cable infrastructure. So something has to change in the regulatory environment, because if they are a giant in this environment, as they're claiming today, what does it mean for the regulation? And therefore, we are asking now for more deregulation for Deutsche Telekom going forward. And then we are fighting for a very fair competition for the interest of our customers. This is, let's say, what I'm going to do in the future.
So what are you specifically then going to do about this? Are you going to go to these regulators with your complaints? Are you going to ask to buy some of those assets? Because you are already purchasing some things from Liberty Global.
Look, I think there's no M&A possibility for Deutsche Telekom in the home market where we are operating. That's for sure. But what I will do is to make sure that politicians, that the leaders, the authorities who are deciding on this deal, that they understand the asymmetric situation which is created by this transaction, and that I'm not asking for a Lex Telecom, for something specific for our company. I'm only asking for a fair competition, for a possibility that we are able to fight with the same weapons, with the same pricing, with the same network infrastructure investments as they are going to be able to do so.
Let me finally ask you then about the merger that you're pursuing, that your T-Mobile unit is pursuing in the U.S. with Sprint. $26.5 billion acquisition. Regulators in the past have had an issue with this combination. Why do you think it'll go forward this time?
Look, the first thing, the market has totally changed. If you see that today all the cable costs, from Comcast to Charter, announcing big mobile customer subscriptions, that they are going into a market which is having both a fixed and a mobile combination. This shows that the market is not just a pure mobile or a pure fixed line market, it's a converged market. The second what we see is that there is a need that rural America is getting competitive, a very well installed 5G infrastructure. So if the small player is going to be able to create this efficiency, we need scale. We need the capability to utilize this infrastructure. And our commitment is clearly to build a 5G infrastructure, not only for the big cities, but especially for rural America on top of that.
That was Deutsche Telekom CEO Tim Hodges. Coming up, we will hear from one of tech's most influential and provocative voices, Chamath Palihapitiya, founder and CEO of Social Capital, next. And a reminder, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the Best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. As we've been discussing, executives from Alphabet, Amazon, and Facebook attended a meeting at the White House on Thursday on artificial intelligence. It was the first meeting between Amazon and the White House since President Trump began targeting the company via tweets in March. We asked Chamath Palihapitiya about it on Tuesday. Palihapitiya is founder and CEO of Social Capital. He joined Facebook when it was just a year old and left to begin his own venture capital firm with investments in firms like Box and Slack, and is making big waves in terms of just how business gets done in Silicon Valley. Take a listen.
I think the practical answer is that it is too nuanced to really understand from so far away. I think the good news is things like these meetings probably say there's some amount of effort being given, but the reality is most people in Silicon Valley don't even understand what AI is. And so the idea that, until we really grapple with what it really means, what actually exists, fact versus fiction, it's probably going to take many years before government really understand what's at risk and what's at play.
We saw Mark Zuckerberg testify before Congress. Many of the lawmakers didn't seem to quite understand how Facebook works. That said, do you think tech needs to be regulated? And do you think Congress can design the right regulation?
Well, I think the right way to think about this is when technology was a small part of the economy, it was probably best left alone. And I think we did a good job of self-regulating. Now the reality is technology is pervasive, right? There is no industry that isn't being refactored or remade by something new using technology at its core. And so with that, I think should come a natural expectation that we need to live by the same rules as everybody else does.
So a few months ago, you talked about how you feel tremendous guilt about what you built at Facebook. It caused a bit of a stir, as some things you say do. And you later said that you genuinely believe Facebook is a force for good in the world. That was before Cambridge Analytica, and there may be many more Cambridge Analyticas. We have no idea how many. We have no idea how many millions or even billions of people may have had their data compromised. So how does that impact your level of guilt now?
Look, I think the reality is that Facebook is probably going to be the company that leads the way out. But the reality is that there's a bigger problem, which is not a Facebook problem. It's a question amongst all of us as consumers. We have grown addicted to things that are free. And we very rarely pay for things when asked to on the internet. It's just not an expectation. But in the rest of our lives, we actually expect to pay for things. Ford doesn't give us free cars. Whole Foods doesn't give us free grapes. We have to pay for all of these things. And with those payments comes expectations and rights and privileges, et cetera. And so similarly, I think what we have to do as consumers is ask ourselves, how much of this do we want to have for free? And if we want rights, how much are we willing to pay for those rights? And those rights should extend to things like data privacy, et cetera. I think in that is the solution to future versions of this problem.
So you think Facebook should do a subscription model?
I think that's too tactical of a solution. I think it's a bigger question at hand, which is we have all assumed that the only way to make money on the internet is to give software away for free and then use advertising to make up the difference. The problem with that is that we have a very weird and undefined gray area between who is the consumer, who is the customer, and how much of a product are you a part of. And I think that's where you have to introduce things like payment and subscription so that those marks are clear. For example, when you look at Netflix's business model, it is unambiguously clear. There is a bi-party relationship between Netflix and the consumer. Spotify has the same thing. Apple, in many ways, has the same thing. When you're a customer of Amazon Prime, you have the same thing. And so I think there are many examples now of an evolution of internet business models. And for example, in my organization, a lot of what we talk about is that. And how do we move away from just relying on ad-supported businesses and think about and embracing subscription, because it clarifies a lot of these problems.
So let's talk about something we definitely don't get for free, and that is a Tesla. You once said that you think Apple should buy Tesla and make Elon Musk CEO. That was a long time ago. The last few weeks, we've seen Elon Musk calling analyst questions boneheaded and boring. We've seen bad April Fool's jokes. What do you think about that kind of behavior? Is that okay?
So unlike most people who read the peanut gallery version of that earnings call, as a large holder of the convertible bonds, I actually listened to the call. And honestly, what I would tell you is that I think that a lot of this stuff was overblown. Now, in fairness to public market investors, they provide critical liquidity for his companies. And specifically in Tesla's case, they are at a critical point where they may need more money. And so I do think it makes sense to make sure that you have the right kind of exchange. I'm not sure, though, quite honestly, whether quarterly earnings calls are the best ways to get at them. I think they're too perfunctory in general. And for a business as nuanced as Tesla, there's frankly really no opportunity to ask the right questions. In fact, what I would rather see Elon do is take the 4 or 5 analysts that really understand the business, and at the top of the list I would put Adam Jonas, and I would bring him under the tent and say, let me really explain these businesses to you, and then have you articulate that to the rest of the Wall Street. And I think that would probably be a step that bridges the gap between people's interpretation of the call and people's frustration with the actual content of the call.
Let's talk about Apple. You know, in the past, you've talked about how they have a problem with innovation. We've seen, however, Apple earnings, and I know we don't love quarterly earnings, but defy expectation just by being stable and sort of defying the smartphone market slump. Do you think Apple still has an innovation problem?
I think that Apple has a fantastic cash machine. I don't think Apple has demonstrated yet what the next lily pad is. And why that's so critical in technology businesses is that the underpinnings of your business model are constantly changing. So, simple example, if we move from ad-supported businesses to subscription, but we may move from subscription to something else. There may be something that comes after a phone. Perhaps it's a VR headset. In all of this is a lot of change. And so in order to accommodate change, I think the best course of action is to try many things. Be okay with failure. Don't be embarrassed by it. It's learning, and it'll help you refine the ultimate thing that works. And so I, as an investor, would love to see more public-facing experimentation that says, we know that the iPhone business isn't going to be around forever, and so we're going to try some things at scale. Now, in fairness to them, they've tried some things that are exceptional. For example, AirPods are fabulous. That is an unbelievable product. I think everybody who uses them loves them.
But certainly not the price point of an iPhone, even though they are still expensive.
It's an excellent point. It is not going to be the thing that replaces the iPhone business. And so you need to find multi-$100 billion or trillion-dollar markets. And for whatever reason, there are only a few: healthcare, education, autos, housing. And so they have to try something big, I think.
You've talked about some public market stocks you think are undervalued, Box, for example. What else? Where do you see opportunity that public market investors aren't seeing?
Yeah, so if we go back to where we started, I really think that over the next 15 to 20 years, consumers are waking up to the realization that they are going to want to have rights and be the ultimate customer. What that means is I believe businesses like Netflix, Spotify, and there are many others that are subscription-based are going to do incredibly well. And in fact, I think that they will massively overperform other kinds of business models. And in part, what that means is those other kinds of businesses, ad-supported businesses, will get revalued and re-rated, in my opinion. There will also be the scepter of regulation. There will be the scepter of privacy risks. And so, to me, where we are spending a lot of time is finding companies that express that view, subscription-based relationships with customers.
That was Chamath Palihapitiya, founder and CEO of Social Capital. Coming up, about 60 million cars on the road come with BlackBerry software. We will speak with BlackBerry CEO John Chen about how the company went from a hardware firm to a software provider for the auto industry. Plus, Alphabet put its best foot forward at the Google I/O conference, rolling out new features and upgrades for its vast lineup of businesses. We're going to hear from a top exec next. This is Bloomberg. An activist firm representing Tesla shareholders wants the electric car maker to shake up its board. CTW Investment Group opposes the re-election of 3 board members who are up for votes next month. The firm claims Tesla has veered off the path to profit and says the board is beholden to CEO Elon Musk. And this week, Google introduced new products and tech upgrades at its annual developers conference, pushing the limits of artificial intelligence and augmented reality. Bloomberg Tech's Mark Bergen caught up with Clay Bavor, Alphabet Vice President of VR and AR. Take a listen.
The big thing we highlighted today were a number of updates to Google Lens. Lens is a capability that lives inside your camera that lets you search what you see, basically.
Yeah, and that I talked a little bit about, you had something called the visual positioning system, and that's something that we're all familiar with. You get off the subway, you try to find where you're going, and everyone usually turns to Google Maps, and the frustration's there where you're not sure exactly where you're going. How are you guys solving that?
Yeah, the situation I think is familiar. You get out of a taxi or off the subway, and you're trying to figure out where you are, and you maybe walk 10 feet that way, see if your blue dot moves, move back. And that's because, especially in urban settings, GPS, because of magnetic fields in buildings and so on, doesn't always work reliably enough to really figure out exactly where you are. So we've been working on what we call VPS, a visual positioning system, that just like you and I would use kind of landmarks in the environment, a tall building, a mountain, to figure out where we are and to navigate, uses similar visual features in the environment to help you figure out exactly where you are and to get you where you're going.
Google's been sitting on this massive asset of maps for a long time. Was it just really technically difficult to integrate some of the work you're doing with augmented reality and maps? So talk to me, why is it taken such a long time to put that out?
We showed some early explorations of enhanced walking navigation in today's keynote. And really, that's about the culmination of a number of technical investments coming together, from computer vision to make sense of signs and things like the visual positioning system to help infer exact location, and then just building out our maps data set. And that's been many years in the making.
Yeah. Today's announcements were all focused on mobile. We didn't see any VR, AR headsets. Are you spending a lot more time thinking about the capabilities of mobile phones rather than headsets?
So we really believe in the long-term potential for both virtual and augmented reality. I think big things will happen in both in the coming years. I think what we're seeing is, because everyone's got a smartphone, everyone's got a smartphone camera, there's an enormous opportunity to improve products and really improve user experiences using the device that we already have. And so Google Lens is about that. Some of the exploration that we showed in Maps walking directions are about that, and you'll see some more things over the next couple of days.
Do you think that the sort of VR market is maybe 5 to 10 years away from really taking off?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball. I think what we're seeing is some promising early adoption of it, especially in enterprise and education, and in some pockets with consumers as well. And we really believe in its long-term promise, and actually just last week unveiled in partnership with Lenovo the Mirage Solo, which is our first standalone headset running Daydream.
That was Clay Bavor, Alphabet Vice President of VR and AR. Well, BlackBerry's in the midst of its second act, moving away from hardware and into software. Big part of its future now is automotive technology. Connected and automated cars are shaping the future of transportation. Like PCs, tablets, and smartphones, autonomous cars will come with their own operating systems. And that's where BlackBerry comes in. It's BlackBerry's QNX software in 60 million cars that's made by Honda, General Motors, and BMW, just to name a few. We caught up with John Chen, CEO of BlackBerry, on Thursday.
I found it, almost laughable to talk about, why don't we put a passenger or put a person there to manage a self-driven vehicle? I mean, what does that mean altogether? So I think most of all the fatality or accidents are caused by humans today. Right? As I pointed out in some of my writings, over a billion. 1.3 million fatalities every year around the world, 50 million people getting hurt, and 90% of that is because of people's errors, human errors. So I think we need to perfect the technology rather than saying, okay, let's just do a patchwork and put a driver in the car to manage a self-driven car. I mean, it just sounds funny to me.
Clearly, the technology isn't safe enough yet, but not having a driver there at all sounds a lot scarier.
True. So first of all, let's talk about the big picture a little bit. It's never good to have fatality, especially when self-driven car. But the statistics shown that today's car, although self-driven car, although still very unsafe, so to speak, on the other hand, it saves a lot of lives. So, let's say if we cut the fatality down by half. That's 650,000 people every year save their lives. And so I think we ought to focus on making the technology safer than arguing about some kind of a stopgap solutions for now and so forth. If it takes longer, it takes longer, but you just have to go full steam ahead on the safety and security side.
So is the ideal to not have drivers in there at all, to have the systems be safe enough so drivers aren't in there at all? And do you think even if they are supposedly that safe, the driver there should be no driver in the car?
That do not need human intervention. Yes, I will hope that's the case.
Can we get there?
Yes, it will. It might not be 2020 that everybody dream of, or 2021, 2025. You know, people will talk about that. The different manufacturers talk about when they're going to release the car. I think, you know, we should take our time to get, as a technology sector, and the automotive sector should take our time to get it right.
You also think that there are privacy concerns.
Yeah. So one of the arguments was doing some monitoring. You know, driver monitoring there. You know, I think that's also a deep privacy concern. I mean, every time you put data on an accessibility, whether it's on the internet or telematics or whatever it might be, it creates that hole. I mean, it's been it's been talked about big time in the last 3 to 6 months. And I think that's also a area of concern. But I'm still back to the original thing. You know, it is a great idea. You know, is a when, not a if. Where the car will be driven by himself safely. It would not be zero accidents, but we hope that will cut down the majority of auto fatality.
Okay, so the president of Audi of America, Scott Keogh, had this to say about regulation, which I do want to ask you about. Take a listen.
You do need a federal standard because that'll get away from a lot of this each state's coming up with different initiatives and how they work towards it. But clearly, caution is the name of the game because you're talking about people's lives. That's what we've always said, and that's what we will continue to say.
What would you like to see happen with regulation?
I think first of all, I'm a big time making sure the private sectors ourselves regulate ourselves first. Mm-hmm. I think it's up to us to develop standards that ISO will adopt. You know, standard bodies will adopt. We will self-regulate ourselves first, and then have a partnership relationship with the government, like whether it's Department of Transportation or it might be whoever the agency is, and to create a standard that establish a minimum safety standard, so the consumer could trust it. And so that's what we like to see happen.
BlackBerry CEO John Chen there. Coming up, Rent the Runway CEO Jennifer Hyman joins us to discuss how she is making changes to ensure all employees at the startup are treated fairly. This is Bloomberg. Just last week, we reported that Chinese smartphone maker Xiaomi could be the biggest IPO in 4 years with a $100 billion valuation. Now, that valuation may not be all that high. Xiaomi may now be looking at a valuation between $60 and $70 billion. While 70% of revenue comes from selling smartphones, co-founder Lei Jun insists that Xiaomi's real goal is to be an internet services company making money off ads and online games. Well, the U.S. is in the midst of an unprecedented strength in the labor market. The April jobs report showed the U.S. unemployment rate dipped below 4% for the first time in 17 years. But the workplace is changing. In 1960, only 20% of mothers worked. Today, 70% of American children live in households where all adults are employed. Meantime, the majority of workers spend more than 40 hours a week on the job. Productivity has increased 400% since 1940, while benefits like leave and health care aren't guaranteed. And in the tech industry, there's a rising split in the workforce. Competitive pay with great benefits for salaried workers, while warehouse and hourly employees can be left with little to no incentives. Rent the Runway CEO Jennifer Hyman wrote about this in a New York Times op-ed, saying our hourly employees working in Rent the Runway's warehouse, on the customer service team, and in our retail stores had to face life events like caring for a newborn, grieving after the death of a family member, or taking care of a critically ill loved one without the same level of benefits. Jen Hyman, CEO of Rent the Runway, joined us in New York.
The change is we decided to equalize benefits across the company, across all functions, meaning that parental leave and sabbatical policies and paid family sick leave and bereavement are the exact same for corporate employees as they are for warehouse employees.
Now, at the outset of your op-ed, you say, I wasn't doing this and that was a mistake. I mean, why? Is it because it's always been done that way? Is it because it was cheaper?
Yeah, no, it actually was. When you found a business, you really take your cues on corporate corporate culture from already successful companies. So I just looked to what companies that I admire were doing, and they were doing incredibly generous things for their employees in corporate, and they had very standardized, more skimpy policies in their warehouse and in their customer service teams, and I just followed suit. And it really took me the consideration of now having a team of 1,200 plus people with a company that is doing extremely well, understanding that I'm in the position I'm in because of the entire team, not just my corporate team. So why is it that my pregnancy is more important than someone on my seamstress team? It's actually not. Like, a life event is as important for any person in my company.
So this is going to be expensive, isn't it? And how do you account for that expense?
First of all, while it might be an expensive upfront cost, I do think that it'll all come out in the wash in terms of higher retention rates, having more productive employees. The cost of bringing in and training new employees is extremely high. And then the loyalty that all employees will have to Rent the Runway. What was remarkable about these changes is we didn't change that much as it related to corporate employees, because our benefits were already really generous for that population. So we just equalized the benefits, and the people that had the most positive reaction to it was our corporate employees, because people want to work at companies that exemplify their values. You know, 70% of millennials, which is the majority of the labor force right now, say they won't work at a company unless it exemplifies a value set that they have. And I think this value set around treating everyone with respect and equally is something that's extremely important to the younger generation.
So let's talk about some other companies with these sort of two-tiered workforces, like Amazon or like Starbucks. How does what you're doing compare to them?
Well, it's very different from them. So as an example, we have a policy that is 4 weeks of bereavement leave. Mm-hmm. And now that 4 weeks of bereavement leave is for anyone on the team that is grieving for a family member. And that is a really generous benefit that Sheryl Sandberg put in place at Facebook, and lots of other companies followed suit after she did that, but they did that for their corporate teams. You know, why is it that a death in the family is more important for someone who works in corporate? It's just not. And, you know, the thing that was really important to me was thinking through the opportunities to arrive in a corporate job. What has given me the privilege of being able to be a founder and be a CEO? So yes, I've worked hard, but I also grew up on the right block with the right parents. And a lot of people who work on my operations team, in my customer service team, didn't have the same educational opportunities. They certainly didn't have the same career opportunities, and they worked just as hard as I have.
So what's the call to action here? What should companies like Amazon, like Starbucks, what should they be doing?
I think that if someone works for your company, whether they are salaried or they're hourly, they should be treated equally. And you should do whatever is financially viable within your company and stage. So I'm not making a claim that Rent the Runway's benefits are the most generous out there, because we're still growing. We're not a company of the size of Amazon. But I am making the promise that everyone's equal, and that as Rent the Runway continues to grow, I'll continue to deliver more and more value to my employees.
Thanks to Jen Hyman, CEO of Rent the Runway. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. Be sure to tune in all next week as Bloomberg Tech heads to Boston. We will once again showcase the innovation, diversity, and power of the regional tech economy. Tune in each day, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology Weekdays. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.